What is going on, everyone? Tutorial Tim here, and today we're at Design Academy and we're going to be creating some chip components. And just to give you the general overview of this video, we're going to overview the chip components first, how they're used, what they are, and then also building out these chip components. And we'll go ahead and open the link here in our exercise file for the chips documentation. And once that opens up, go ahead, and once that loads, you can see that chips are compact elements that represent an input, attribute, or action. So this is here in our design, this is our chip here, as you can see, and it is essentially in this text field where it's specifying who to send an email to, and it's this person labeled Peyton Smith, named Peyton Smith, excuse me, and as you can see, once the email has been typed out, or the username, and it's been selected, it turns into a chip, and there is a little image as well to represent who that user is, that profile picture. And with that context in mind, we can go ahead and understand the usage. It allows users to enter information, make selections, filter content, or trigger actions. While buttons are expected to appear consistently and with familiar calls to actions, chips should appear dynamically as a group of multiple interactive elements. And here you can see the principles. They are intentionally compact, relevant, so they have clear and helpful information in relation to the content or task that is represented in the UI. And chips should make tasks easier to complete or content easier to sort. And here we have all of the chip types here, as you can see, and we have an anatomy of one of the most complex chips here. So we have the generic container that holds all of the chip elements, and their size is determined by those elements. Here you can see we have an optional thumbnail, which is the leading icon here, which can be utilized to identify entities such as profiles by displaying an avatar, logo, or icon there. And then we also have the text, of course, to display the entity name, description, tag, action, or conversational. And then the fourth element to this anatomic breakdown is the input chips can include a remove icon, indicating that you can remove that entire chip if need be. And here we have a breakdown of all the usages for the different types, but we're not going to get into that. I recommend you going through and consuming that information as needed. And here we have all the types that we're going to be creating. But one thing I want you to note is that 3 of these chips are the same, but they are explicitly stated as different chips in this documentation. And I just want us to kind of take note of that and pay attention. So here in the specs, we have this action chip, the outline chip, choice chip, filter, and we have the input chips and the chips, an example of chips in groups where they have a spacing of 8 dips there between each chip. And you'll notice that the action, choice, and filter chip are all the same exact chip, but the underlying functionality could be different, which is kind of the point I wanted to get to there. And with that stated, we can go ahead and jump into our Figma file and start building out these chips. And I'm going to go ahead and ensure that I have my material design system library enabled in this exercise file. And with that said, we can go ahead and start creating these chips. So with this chip created, I'm going to go ahead and create a frame. And before I do, I'm going to copy that name, label this action, that frame name, because this is going to be our action chip. And I'm going to go ahead and add the background color surface under surfaces overlay. And then I'm going to set the rounded corners to 16, so it's nice and round there. And I'm going to set the height to 32, and then we'll go ahead and modify the width as needed. And the nice thing is we'll be able to quickly add auto layout to this, so it dynamically adapts to the text string within it, so you don't have to manually resize it, which is very helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and add this text style here. And by adding this text style, I can go ahead and select the body to text style, because that is what's utilized in chips. And I can go ahead and label this action chip. And I want by default my typography to resize automatically. And then I'm going to go ahead and center this. And what I'm going to do is hold down Shift A. That creates auto layout. Then I'm going to hit Shift A again, which creates auto layout on the parent frame. And now you'll notice I can adjust the dip padding to 12 dips on the left and right as opposed to 51 here, which is what's specified currently. So if I type in 12, I have now shrunken that to 12, and it currently says 13 because auto layout by default adds one extra pixel horizontally and vertically to your element, which is annoying in my opinion. So if we reset that, it'll showcase that it's set to 12 on the left and right and is vertically centered, which is great on the y-axis. And we have now created our first chip. And we can go ahead and bang out the two other chips here, the choice chip and the filter chip. So here are some intricate things to understand about the design system. And here is where decisions are made on a per team basis, as I like to call it. So we have this action chip, right? And there are three types of this action chip where they all look the same visually, but the functionality under the hood could be much different and utilized in different scenarios. So say this component built in code is represented differently. Does that mean you want to reflect that in your designs as well? Or do you just want to utilize the same exact design and just call that the action chip instead of having the action chip, choice, and filter chip? Well, to be consistent in terms of the naming conventions you have in your design files and what engineers have developed on the front end, you may want to create three variants of this. So in order to do so, all of the styling is the same. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to make this action chip a component. And with that being a component, I'm going to label this label. And then I'm going to go ahead and rename this the choice chip. And then I'm going to hit enter and rename the frame as label. And then I'm going to rename this filter chip. I'm going to label that filter. And I'm going to rename this text auto layout frame to label, layer to label. I can go ahead and select both of these, both of those elements, and click on that and select create multiple components. And now I have all three component variants, which is very important. What I'm going to need to do is rename them. So this is the choice chip. This is the filter chip. And now we are rocking and rolling. We have those three variants knocked out of the park. And what we can do now is focus on the outline chip and the input chip. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and grab this chip here to get a head start. And what this chip has currently is I'm going to detach this and label this action outlined. And once that's labeled properly, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the auto layout by holding down Command Option, actually just Option Shift A. Then I'm going to do the same exact thing to the other auto layout frame layer, and then hit Option Shift A and hit Command Shift G to remove that frame from the text as it's not needed. So with this typography here, what we're going to need right now is an icon placeholder because this is an outline chip. So what I can go ahead and do is in this file, I already have an icon placeholder. Copy that, and I'm going to hold that command on this bounding box on the left to stretch that out and paste this. And I'm going to snap this to the left and make sure that is 4 pixels to the left there and is centered vertically. And then move this text over, add this constraint to set the constraints on this text to right and center on the y-axis, and then push this over until the typography is 8 pixels away from the icon here. So just got to move this over about essentially 3 pixels. So I got to move that over 1 more pixel. Whoops. There we go. Once that's specified there, we got those specs set properly. We got to, and the padding is set to 12 dips on the right and 8 on the left. We are good to go, and that is our outlined action chip. And what we're going to want to do now is specify a 1 pixel stroke and set that to inside, which it already is by default. And we're going to add this surfaces overlay color to the stroke. But I'm going to remove that color style right there. And I'm going to go to surfaces overlay. And I now have that specified. And if that icon placeholder is too hard to see, we can change the color of that. And now we have our action outline chip, and we can go ahead and even add auto layout to this, so the spacing is dynamic, so you don't have to manually do this all the time. So I hit Shift A to make auto layout, and then I'm going to remove the default horizontal and vertical padding, and then realign this. You'll have to realign it when you do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and move that over, make sure that's 4 dips to the left here. And then I'm going to have to add auto layout to this as well and remove the 1 pixel padding added and realign these elements, which is annoying. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and shift click on both of these in the layers panel and hit Shift A. And what I've essentially done is maintain the spacing between these 2 elements by creating that parent. And now what I can do is go ahead and select my action outlined frame, the parent frame, and hit Shift A. And I can go ahead and specify the spacing for that element as well. And it will be dynamic, but one thing to note is that auto layout can get tricky because you can't individually specify the spacing. So if I want this to be 12 on this side, it's currently not possible to do that with auto layout. So what you can do is just go ahead and undo those actions, and you may have to manually readjust this. And we'll tackle this in our next video, in our next section of the course, excuse me. So now that we've created this outline action chip, we can go ahead and duplicate it and then create that as a main component. Once that's specified, we can go ahead and start tackling this input chip, where it is slightly different. I'm gonna have to end up removing the auto layout in frames here, and then so I was using shortcut key Option Shift A to remove the auto layout, and then Command Shift G to remove the frame, as that is what is left once you create remove auto layout. It turns into a frame, and then you have to remove the frame. So with that said, I will label this input chip. All the proper padding has been specified right now. We have that icon placeholder, and now we need to add an actionable icon here. And I already have that in here in our design system library. That is called the cancel icon. So I can copy that and select your parent frame and then paste it in there if need be. I'm going to drag this here, and I'm going to reset the size to 18 by 18 and go ahead and drag this into this component, ensure it's vertically centered, and snap that to the right and push that over roughly 8 dips. And with that specified, we now have our input chip, but what we're going to need to do is set the constraints on this action icon to right and center vertically. And then I'm going to go ahead and push this content over so that there's only 8 dips between the text and this action icon. And I'm going to set that icon placeholder to left and center vertically. And then set this to left and center vertically. And then move this over and ensure I have that spacing set appropriately. So I have 8 dips on the left and right of this text. And one thing I'm missing is a fill, and I need to remove the stroke and add the surfaces overlay color to this chip. And once I've specified that, we are now good to go, and we've created all of the chip types for our design system. All we need to do is label this input, and once we've specified that, we have now created all the main components necessary for our chips. And that is all I have to show you today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. I think I almost forgot, in addition to our auto layout tends to resize the height of your components. So we want to make sure we go into our components here, and since we have the proper constraints set, we want to double check we have the proper constraints set for our components. And with auto layout specified on some of these components, we're going to want to resize some of these elements and ensure they're good to go. Just make sure that's set to 32 as the height for all of these chips are set to 32. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of these components. And since the constraints are set to center vertically, they will dynamically adjust properly. And some of these have auto layout, so I can't just manually adjust the height with auto layout implemented. So what I can do is remove that auto layout and readjust that height, and do the same thing here with this component. Notice that when I remove the auto layout, you can't see it. I'm using a shortcut key, Option Shift A. It preserves the main component icon, but watch this, watch the bounds change. I'll be able to change the height after this. So I just hit Option Shift A. It's now changed the bounding box, and I'm going to go ahead and increase that by 1 pixel on each side. All the spacing is maintained and whatnot, and we are good to go. And that is all I have. Thank you. See ya.